So thank you so much for being with me today. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
My name is Linser and I live here in London, Ontario. And I guess I'm, here to talk about being trans.
So you were born a female, transitioned into a male. When did that happen? When did you go through that change?
That happened quite a few years ago.
And when did you know that you had been born in the wrong body?
I never did.
Really?
Yeah, I never did. So
what made you make that decision?
What happened was I had a very rare autoimmune called polyarteritis nodosa.
Okay.
And generally it's diagnosed after somebody passes away from it. So it was somewhat rare to have a live person who had it. And I just had very lucky circumstances that I was diagnosed. I happened to be in Minneapolis, close to Mayo Clinic, and in a teaching hospital under a student visa. So I had everything lined up properly to be able to get a diagnosis, where many times people don't, they just die because it kills you quite quickly. So they were able to keep me alive. And some years later, I was still getting flares. So, and every flare-up was potentially the end. So every flare-up was I had to fight it again and fight for my life, basically. So I was very concerned about this continuing, and could it, and how long could I do this? There was a study that was being done actually in France on this polyarteritis nodosa, and my rheumatologist here put me in as part of that. And they did every test under the sun on me and found me to be a very healthy, in fact, exceptionally healthy person. Now, I had done my dissertation on trans people in the early 60s movements, and how they were fighting for freedom and even fighting for sexual freedom, and yet for some reason they all use the same logic to throw trans people out. And so my project was about, what was that logic? Where did it come from?
Can you tell the audience what that logic was?
Yeah, that logic was a particular psychoanalytic discourse that had developed through the late 1800s and into modern medicine. It came in under the guise of psychoanalytic work and other kinds of therapies. Okay. So the movements attacked psychoanalysis and attacked those therapies for what they said about women, people of color, right, and other minority groups, but they didn't attack it for what it said about trans people. They used it. And they used it to throw those people out of the movements. And they all used the same discourse. So they used exactly the same discourse as the oppressor, right, in order to do this. And that's why all of these different movements that actually disagreed about a lot of things, and even different groups within feminism disagreed about a lot of things. But a lot of them could agree about this discourse, about how trans people were absolutely unacceptable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I did a lot of reading in order to put all of this together, and I read a lot of trans people. And Renee Richards was one of the first that I read. And so you might remember that she was a tennis star, and she transitioned very publicly. And there's a lot of controversy about her. This is in the 70s. And she said something very interesting, which is when she started taking hormones, her health improved. Christine Jorgensen said the same thing like a few decades earlier, that when she started taking hormones, her health improved. And when I read this in their biographies, it really jumped out at me for some reason. And so when I was going through these tests, all these years later, I said, can you test my hormones? Because it's one of the things you never tested. And my rheumatologist was like, well, okay, because I mean, if it's not a reproductive question, your hormones in Western medicine almost don't exist.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. But yeah, they're neglected.
Medically, in terms of medical opinions, they almost don't exist. And so I said, can you do a scan on my hormones? And they said, yeah, okay. You know, we might as well. We've looked at everything else. And when they came back, my hormones were, well, I went to see the endocrinologist, and he said, how do you feel? Do you feel male or do you feel female? And I said, I have no idea what you're asking me. You know, I don't know what either of those things would feel like. And he said, well, you know, I think you can actually choose which one you want to be, because you don't really have strong hormones for either one. And it's not surprising if you don't feel either one. You know, it's not surprising if you don't feel strong anything, you know, because your hormones are so low.
That is so interesting. So you were able to really pick.
Yeah, and I did. So he said, what do you do? And I said, well, mostly I do construction. He said, well, I think you probably chose.
So there was no question you were going to choose male.
There was no question, really. You know, I was wearing men's clothes already. So when I went home after that meeting with my endocrinologist, I walked into my apartment and I looked at everything in my apartment with like fresh eyes. And I said, is this the apartment of a woman? Or is this the apartment of a man? Right? Like, where do I live? And really, there was nothing that I had to change.
Oh, that is so even your home was quite masculine.
Yeah.
Oh, very fascinating.
But I considered that I lived my life as a human.
Okay.
It's just that humans in a sexist society are men.
Ah.
So if you look at what Simone de Beauvoir wrote, right, very early book, The Second Sex, you know, practically started the feminist movement, you know, of the 60s. If you look at what she wrote, you know, there is really only one sex, and that's male, and women are other than that. So, and we see this right through our cultures. So if we look at how we have gendered the sun and the moon, right? She moves in the darkness, he moves in the light, right? The powerful rays of the sun. You know, like we give all of these characteristics to that, and she is other than that.
Very, very interesting. So our entire society revolves around men being
human,
at the center of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So as I went through life, seeing myself as human, I also saw myself within this society as male. Not because I felt masculine, but because I felt human.
Now, before you transitioned, did you ever feel any social pressure to adhere to one or the other?
There were pressuring moments for sure. And in fact, now that I've changed my presentation, I can now look back and see things that I couldn't see before. And so now I can see where my family was actually trying to re-socialize me to be more feminine than I was. So like taking me on play dates with girls when I didn't play with girls.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like they were actively re-socializing me and I didn't know it.
Do you recall what age you were when this was happening?
Yeah, this was happening through like grade 2, 3 is really
And what about as an adult? Did you ever feel like, because you mentioned you were a female, but you weren't overly feminine. Did you ever feel any social pressure that that was a bad thing?
Well, I mean, I just presented as I was. And so it's not like I didn't present as feminine, right? So, and in fact, I had a lot of trouble with that.
In what way?
You know, just unwanted attention. Just what every woman gets, right?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, you know, so just that. So, I mean, because for me, for myself, looking through these eyes, I didn't see that. I wasn't looking for that. I didn't see that. And so when I got it back, it was always a bit of a surprise, you know.
I can see how that would have been jarring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So now that you have transitioned into a male, what differences have you noticed in how you're treated as a man?
Everything. What's not different? Really? What's not different? Everything is different. You know, you're given more respect. You're put first before women. Other men will invite you into things that they won't invite women to, things that are important in terms of career or information about health or other things. Men will share with each other before they'll share with women. You know, I meet men, and it's not hard to meet men who actually talk about women as if they're almost another species.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, they won't talk around their girlfriends like that, but with other guys.
This is interesting because I've interviewed a few other trans men, and they've said the same thing.
Yeah.
The way that men talk about women amongst themselves is completely different, and not in the nicest light, really.
Some men.
Some of them. No.
Yeah, yeah. But there is a norm, and this is just it, is that there's several norms that run underneath gender that you can adhere to depending on how you've entered into gender yourself. And so, for example, you can enter into a very sexist norm. You can enter into a norm where rape is normalized. It exists. You can find it if you're that kind of guy, right? Or you can enter into a norm where you protect women. And they may be secondary because you're the protector, right? They need you. So, or you may move into a norm where women are the goddess. And so now you're going to talk about them like they're the goddess, but they're still not guys.
So it sounds like you're describing multiple norms all within the same society.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we've got. We've got multiple discourses about masculinity that we run through. And when you're in those particular groups, there are things you can say and there are things you can't. About yourself and about women. So it's about you. It's about how you understand your gender. You know.
You're watching Let's Talk Trans. We'll be back after a word from our sponsors. So you mentioned that there are privileges, even in terms of the information you're given, access to the important decisions that are being made. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
I will be at a mixed gathering of people who are fairly enlightened, you know, and they have girlfriends or partners that are there. And the conversation between me and the other men will be different than what would be said when the women are there. And so we'll talk about finances in a different way, as if those women are not existing in the same financial system that we're in, and as if they're not financially savvy, which they all are. So that's an example, you know, of how there's this cutting out that can happen of women, even in mixed groups. So, and it happens around access to resources as well, which is why men can source, you know, things they want or things they need, right? And some women will wonder, how do they do this? How do they always manage to source the things they're interested in? Why is it so difficult for me? And it's because guys are always doing this. They're trading, they're sourcing, they're looking, and they're giving each other these kinds of access. And then those men give it to their women.
So they're the gatekeepers.
Yes. Yeah. And it happens in a very casual way. It's very normative.
So it's interesting because even as you're describing that mixture where, say, some finances are being discussed, it's almost as if there's an assumption that women are inherently unable to understand the concepts of finance.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing to me because, I mean, quite often I'll have a more nuanced or complex conversation about finances with that person's girlfriend than I had with him. So, right? Like some of this social cutting out is absurd. You know, it's just based on gender. And then women will talk to me afterwards and say, how could I have been cut out of this conversation about X when in fact I am that as a professional? And over again, right?
So it's being noticed.
Yeah, it's being noticed. You know, some women are noticing it, right? Yeah. But I mean, quite often it has to be like very much in women's faces because they've been normalized to sexism too.
I could see that.
Yeah.
So in terms of, so there's clear privileges to being a man. As a woman, I wouldn't understand that. What are some of the disadvantages to being a man in your opinion?
There's not a lot. I would say, as someone who does see, you know, male or female entities as just equal, right? I would say that some of the disadvantage is not having the same friendship access. Right? Because so many men have, you know, walked the darker path with women, you know? And so because of that, women are very held back, you know? And that, I understand that. So you can't necessarily have the same kind of friendship. And it takes longer to establish a friendship with women because women are leery, right?
On guard, oh, for sure.
Yeah, on guard, and they should be, you know, so.
What about friendships between men?
Friendships between men are very difficult because it really depends on what script the other guy is running. So is he running the every man on the face of the earth is a competitor with me script? Right? And I really have no friends, really. Like you have a use value, and that's what my friendships are made out of. Like there's a lot of different scripts, you know, that guys are running with each other. So it's hard to tell sometimes like how in friendship you really are. It's certainly not the same as being friends with women. So there's the lost part, right? It's not the same as being friends with women because there are so many men who are running they run their lives through these scripts. and it's a way to push people away. You know, it's a distancing tactic that keeps men, like, you know, further emotionally distanced.
I mean, that would obviously have severe repercussions as you age, as you have a crisis in your life. Yeah, that's very fascinating.
Yeah, there are a lot of isolated men.
That would
Right?
be very
There are
lonely.
tons of isolated men. Yeah. You know, so, and it's because we're living in a social system that really has, we were talking earlier before the interview, we were talking about the amount of fear, how our system is driven on fears. And men are at the forefront of that, driving those fears, creating those fears, spreading those fears, you know, the what ifs.
Very interesting. So men don't really form friendships with each other. Or if they do, I'm sure it does happen, but
Yeah.
it's rare and perhaps not as deep or as meaningful as female friendships. Would you?
It tends to be more historical, and so, you know, who had my back when, you know, the people I grew up with and can trust. So there's a big one, who can I trust? You know, because there's so many other guys out there who will take you, or because they're competitive, right? They're running the
Take
competitive
advantage.
strip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I could see that. So I would like to ask you, before this interview, we were talking a little bit about how sexism and transphobia are linked. Can you explain for the audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, I can explain that. It's very, very many times what trans people experience is some version of sexism. You know, you're a woman, but you're not pretty enough.
Ah,
Right?
yes.
So sexism becomes the weapon that comes at you as a trans person. You know, you're not a real man, you know, because you don't have the real parts. You know, you're not tall enough, you're not big enough, as if there's no, you know, short or small men on the face of the earth. You know, so it's this sexism weapon that gets pulled out against you. So there is some things that are unique to transphobia. You know, for example, dead name, right, is unique to transphobia. People using it as a weapon.
Okay, yes.
You know, but how transphobia manifests in a lot of families is through sexism. So families that don't want to grant to that boy, you know, who they see as female, they don't want to grant that boy the same privileges that they're granting other boys in the family.
Did you experience this within your own family?
Oh,
This
yeah.
sort of sexism, transphobia?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit those situations, what that was like for you, as much as you're comfortable going into that?
Yeah, and so I could, in my own family, I could see how manifesting as male, running that different discourse, was really about how they were assigning privileges and where they were actually taking privileges away and feeling okay about it. And so women can do less than men, right? That kind of thing running as an assumption. So nobody's saying it, you know, it's just behaviors, and it's very subtle, you know. A friend might not see it, right? A friend might not see it, you know. A partner might not see it, right? You might have to explain, this is what just happened in the kitchen, right? There was just like a subtle attack through sexism.
And did you notice this? So before you transitioned, did you notice this, or was this something that became a lot more clear to you after you transitioned, this sexism even within the family?
I think I was becoming aware of it because of growing up just thinking of myself as a human. And so I was seeing it already, right? You know, like these places where people would, you know, they would be trying to enforce gender and instead of personhood. You know, so I mean, the sexist stuff is just like out there sexist. It's the subtle stuff that always gets to you, because it's the subtle stuff that's going to come from the people closer to you. You know, friends or family or partners.
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, actually. How did your family react to you transitioning?
They knew that the social norm in liberal terms in Canada was swinging behind a pro-trans discourse.
Okay.
So socially, if you're a good liberal, you won't be anti-trans, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So everything was private. So, and anything that did trouble them, it all came through privately.
So they wanted to appear as if they were supportive and liberal and not transphobic.
Yes.
But the day-to-day actions kind of spoke a different...
There was a different thing going on. And so and I think a lot of Canadians are also experiencing this, right? The recognition of trans people at the same time as their own behaviors are not there, you know?
Yes.
And if it's friends, like I totally don't care. You know, if it's my friends, I know my friends love me, and I don't police their language. I don't even have to, you know. But it's people who are doing it as like a weapon or as, you know, trying to get at you.
Your own family using it as a weapon to get at you.
Yeah, it's that. It's the lack of love that's behind it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That rings 100% true to me, and I'm sure other people listening to this.
Yeah, it's not the words, right? It's like we discussed, even with words that are, you know, derogatory words about us, right? About LGBT people, you know, about black people, about, right? Those derogatory words, well, I mean, your best friend can say it to you, right? You know, it's not about that. It's about, is there love behind that language or is there not?
Yes. And is your love conditional?
Yeah.
You're watching Let's Talk Trans. We'll be back after a word from our sponsors.
I volunteered with Pride just as a volunteer in the beer garden. I was scheduled at a few different events. I was just a volunteer at the time, and that was my first year that I came out and volunteered with Pride. And I realized how much just one event brought the community together. How much of an impact in London that having all the different Pride was there for people. You saw.
Replay the song, please. Alexa, replay.
That command is not supported right now.
Rude. Alexa, replay song.
That command is not supported right now.
Explain a little bit about what you do for work, your field of study, that sort of thing.
Well, right now with COVID and everything pretty shut down, mostly what I've been doing is working with a painting group. There's 3 of us, and we're called Our 3 Cents. And it's a reconciliation painting group between people who are settlers and people who are First Nations, Métis.
Oh, very nice.
So we do paintings. We paint in acrylics. We've got a show coming up at Station Gallery in November, and it's commentary, as you might imagine.
I bet.
We use a format of Canadian stamps, and we re-articulate the stories of Canada's history a little bit more truthfully.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool project. So.
And you teach, I believe?
I have not been teaching for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, so because I left the university system, and I opened a cafe here in London, and it was actually a trans-positive cafe, like a stated trans-positive space. And I was told, you're going to get rocks through the window. And it was true that we battled for the entire 5 years that we were open with the basically homophobic landlord.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was brutal because that was a legal battle, and so it sucked all the money that we made. It sucked it all. So we did that for 5 years, and so we paid a price, you know, for running as LGBTQ positive coffee house in London.
So you experienced homophobia, transphobia from the landlord and from the public.
The public have been amazing.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and so we're going to get a rock through the window. No, that was a lie. We never did. We never got anything like that. And in fact, it was a gay male who told us that. And there we have it, living in fear, right? The fear story. You need to be afraid. You need to change your behavior, right? You need to become the thing that I'm telling you that you need to fear. Like you need to, and we weren't having it. And so, you know, we were like loud and proud. And we did not get rocks through the window, no.
So how did you find the public was?
Very supportive, and in fact I find that there are a lot of super awesome people out in the general public. There really are. Like there's so many like loving, kind, understanding, awesome people. You know, very trans supportive. They might not have the language, you know, but the intent is there. And for me, like I was saying earlier, that's everything, right? What's behind the words? I don't need to know that you know the language that I know. You don't need to have it. You can bumble with the wrong words. I just need to hear the right heart.
So that love you mentioned that was missing from some of these encounters with family, you're actually sensing that and hearing that from the public.
Yeah.
Which is so good to hear.
Yeah, which I mean makes the family situation even more acute, right?
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Because it's like I can actually get more positive, loving feedback from a stranger, right, on the street than I can from... So it just makes it that much more acute when the love is not there, you know, when the withholding becomes the weapon.
That would be painful, but it's good to hear that the public at least is more enlightened.
Yes, at least, but I mean, I need to qualify this too, right? Because it's so much easier to transition. You know, it's so much easier to change your expression to male, like we were saying, in a sexist society.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's actually a very good point.
It actually is, because in fact, both men and women are friendlier to me as a male than they are to women.
Then they are to... Okay, wow.
Yeah. That was a surprise.
That is a surprise.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah. A disturbing surprise, right? It's disturbing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And before the interview, you mentioned that you found that women were fantastic, are fantastic with you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain for the audience a little bit what that's been like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women have been very, very supportive, even somewhat protective, you know. So insofar as I've had like a lot of support that hasn't been thrown back in my face in one way or another, you know, by bros. Women have not done that, you know. So
You know, what's interesting about this is that I've interviewed a few trans women, and they've said that while some women have been fantastic with them, they've also experienced some hostility.
mm-hmm.
So again, there may be some of that.
It's like, again, it's which discourse of femininity are you hooking into for your friend group?
Mm.
Right? Are you hooking into that discourse of femininity that's very competitive? Or are you hooking into like a more loving community based, right? And that discourse within, you know, feminine communities is bigger than within male. Like for me to find that community within groups of men, it's quite difficult.
So there's variation in what it means to be a man and masculinity within this culture, but there's also variation for what it means to be a woman and what it means to be feminine.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So when you find your group that you kind of resonate with in terms of your language, your presentation, right, your ideas about the world, you do tend to think that all women are like that.
Ah.
Because the people you're surrounding yourself with are like that. Right?
Your reality seems like the norm.
Yeah, it does. And so that's how we get bigots who think the norm is their reality. That's how we get those parents who say, you make me ashamed. What am I going to tell my friends? Right? So
I recoil at the thought of a parent telling a child that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but many of us have heard that. I've heard that. You know, the question of how am I going to face what am I going to tell my friends? Like what? And it's this judgment scenario that's just negative.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. But really, it's a heart looking for a reinforcement for not being warm. Right? It's looking for a resonance, a mirror of that coldness, so that they can say, my shut-off emotions are okay too.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been very, very, very interesting. I've learned a lot. I wish we had more time.
Uh-huh.
You're a wellspring of knowledge, and I thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you. This has been a great interview, you know, and I'm really happy to have met you and had this time.
Yeah, you too. Thank you again.